Hey guys, French Tutor here. Today I wanted to talk about Silverwolf, a 5-star quantum nihility character who can add weaknesses and debuff various stats on enemies. She wields an arm blade and cannon and uses other various hacking tools to mess with her enemies. With the addition of Silverwolf to the character roster, she adds refreshing new strategies and team comps to the game. After using and testing her for several days, I wanted to share my findings, especially some practical ways to use her skill in combat. In this video, I'm going to go over how to play her best Lycons, Relics, team comps, Eidolons, and my advice on how to make her the best she can be. Before we begin, I just want to say that it will really help me out as a small content creator if you can like and subscribe after watching. Thank you, and let's jump right into the video. The most important aspect to know about Silverwolf's kit is her skill, which has the ability to add weaknesses onto enemies. Her skill Allow Changes has an X% base chance to implant one weakness of an ally's type, including hers, onto one enemy. Once the weakness is implanted, it also reduces the enemy's damage resistance to the new weakness type by 20%, but if the enemy already has the weakness type, this effect would not be triggered. I just wanted to note that it's very logical for this skill to reduce an enemy's new weakness type's resistance by 20%, because with most enemies, usually they have 20% more damage resistance to elements they are now weak to than the elements they are weak to, so when they gain a new weakness, it completes the whole package with a new weakness type. Additionally, there's a 100% base chance to reduce the all-type resistance of an enemy by X%. To clarify, all-type resistance is the same as general damage resistance, so you will be doing more damage with all elements. Finally, all of these effects will last for 2 turns. But once you unlock her Ascension 4 bonus ability, the duration of the weakness implanted will last 1 more turn. Also note, enemies cannot have multiple weakness types implanted onto them, so if Silverwolf already implanted a weakness onto an enemy and you use her skill again, only one new weakness type will be in effect. Right before she implants a weakness, you can visually see which elemental type it will be from the element icons and colors. The in-game description of her skill is very brief and doesn't explain in detail how it actually functions. After some testing and playing around with it, here are 5 important rules that dictate how her skill works and how to optimize it for team building. Rule number 1. When Silverwolf uses her skill and wants to implant a weakness, there's an equal chance for all elements to be chosen regardless of how many allies have the same elemental type. So if you have 2 elemental types to choose from your team's elements, there's a 50-50 chance of implanting either weakness type. When you have 3 elemental types, you will have a 33% chance for each type to be chosen, and for 4 elemental types, you have a 25% chance for each. So if you have 3 ice allies and 1 quantum Silverwolf, she chooses between the 2 elements, ice and quantum, and you have a 50-50 chance of implanting either weakness type onto an enemy, but there is an exception to this rule, which is rule number 2. When an enemy already has a natural weakness type that is the same as an ally's elemental type, that type will not be included in the selection pool of weakness types she can implant. So for example, let's look at this enemy and team. The enemy has a natural physical weakness type, and my team has 2 physical units and 2 quantum units. Since the enemy already has a natural physical weakness, you will get a 100% guaranteed quantum weakness. This is the best way to actually control what weakness you want to implant on an enemy and is not RNG based. And this rule changes everything, especially the way you build teams. For example, you can now build your team around a main DPS you normally couldn't use to their fullest potential since the enemies did not have their weakness type. So when you look at the weakness previews of enemies on Calyxes, the Forgotten Hall and Memory of Chaos, or the simulated universe, you want to first consider your other team members other than your main DPS. So this enemy here has quantum, ice, and physical weaknesses. I can put in Silverwolf for the quantum, March 7th for ice, and Clara for physical. And now I can put in my main DPS Dan Hung. And now, every time I use Silverwolf's skill, she will apply a wind weakness 100% of the time, so my main DPS can become even better, and the entire team can trigger weakness breaks together. Another new way you can build teams is by creating a mono-type team when an enemy is naturally weak to quantum. So if you look at this enemy, I see that they're weak to quantum, and you can even completely ignore the fire and lightning weaknesses. Then I can simply make a monotype team like this with ice. Now, every time Silver Wolf uses her skill on this enemy, she will apply an ice weakness 100% of the time, and all my ice type team members can take full advantage of it. Now on to rule number 3. When Silver Wolf already implanted a weakness type on an enemy and you use Silver Wolf's skill again on the same enemy, there's still the same chance to implant the same weakness. For example, if you implanted a physical weakness type before and you use her skill again, you are still able to implant a physical weakness type and not a new weakness type. So it is not advised to use her skill again on the same enemy just for the sake of trying to switch to another weakness type. You might be wasting a skill point this way. But I'll show you very soon when you actually do want to use her skill on an enemy that already has a weakness planted on them. Rule number 4. When Silver Wolf uses her skill, she implants a weakness type first before doing damage. This is important because when Silver Wolf implants a quantum weakness, she can reduce enemies' toughness bars first, potentially weakness breaking an enemy for more damage. And finally, rule number 5. When a team member is down, their elemental type will not be included in the selection pool of weakness types she can implant. Now that we learned how her skill works, here are some other potential ways you can use her skill. A great time to use her skill on an enemy when they're already implanted with a weakness type is when an enemy is close to being defeated and just before the enemy's weakness type disappears, which would be their third turn if you have your Ascension 4 bonus ability unlocked, so that your allies can benefit from a new or same weakness type. You may be able to clear content faster in less turns in the Forgotten Hall or Memory of Chaos, or if you miss this opportunity, you may miss out on reducing an enemy's toughness bar earlier and extra damage between the time it's the enemy and Silver Wolf's turn. Another potential but risky and situational way to use your skill is when an enemy is already implanted with a weakness that is not quantum, but their toughness bar is almost finished. This lets you weakness break and take full advantage of the quantum break effect. I would not advise doing this if your teammates were benefiting from the previously implanted weakness, and this works best if you have a second quantum unit so that they can also take advantage of the quantum weakness. So now that you know this is a potential option with her, let me show you what I like to call her ultimate combo, which can potentially break an elite or boss enemy's entire toughness bar. You would need a dual type team, and another quantum unit is recommended to pull this off if you are working with a full toughness bar. Also, having some ults would be great too. First, try to implant a weakness other than quantum on the enemy. Take advantage of their new weakness with 2 allies first. Then use Silver Wolf's skill again and see if you can win the 50-50, and apply quantum. Now with 2 quantum units, try to break the enemy's toughness bar and potentially finish them off completely. It's a fun little combo that wouldn't be possible without Silver Wolf's weakness implanting ability, and I hope you give it a try when you see a potential opportunity. Now let's talk about her ultimate. Her ultimate user band has an X% base chance to reduce one enemy's defense by X% for 3 turns. At level 6, she has a 92% base chance to reduce an enemy's defense by 40.5% and does quantum damage equal to a staggering 304% of Silver Wolf's attack. With this amount of damage, you can definitely build her as a DPS unit as well with the right build. Also note that the ult duration of 3 turns is a considerable amount of time, and with an energy regeneration rate rope, you can easily have her ult up again once the debuff duration is over. Her talent, Awaiting System Response, allows any of her attacks to implant one of 3 random bugs, which are debuffs. She can reduce attack, defense, or speed by X% for 3 turns. At level 6, she can reduce attack by 7.5%, defense by 6%, and speed by 4.5%. When you unlock her Ascension 2 bonus ability, bug durations will last one more turn, and you have a 65% base chance to apply a random bug to an enemy you weakness break by Silver Wolf, so you can potentially plant 2 bugs in one turn. Luckily, you can stack multiple bugs on enemies, but not the same one. For example, if you already implanted an attack reduction buff, the next bug will have to be a defense or speed reduction one. You can implant all 3 different bugs on an enemy, but never 2 of the same one. When an enemy has 3 bugs planted, 1 bug will disappear and you will have a total of 3 different bugs. All these bugs are all very good. If you use your ultimate at level 6 traces and implant the defense bug, you could potentially reduce defense by up to 46.5%. If you implant a speed bug on an enemy, you could potentially let an ally go first over an enemy. And finally, an attack reduction may even let you survive a fatal attack from an enemy. Her bugs make a huge portion of the debuffs she applies, which helps her if you have E1 or E6 Silverwolf who needs a certain amount of debuffs for more energy regeneration or damage, or using a DPS light cone such as Good Night and Sleep Well to do more damage. If you ever need to check the amount of debuffs an enemy has, click and hold on an enemy or press Z, and on the bottom right you will see how many debuffs they have. Normally I wouldn't talk about a character's basic attack since it's so basic except for Qing Chue's, but I wanted to quickly mention a few things. There will be times when it is not ideal to use her skill again because you already implanted enough weaknesses on the field or you don't want to change them, especially if you are fighting a single elite or boss enemy. Silverwolf's talent and bug planting actually makes your basic attack worthwhile since it can debuff enemies' speed, defense, and attack, so use it with confidence. She can also gain skill points for your allies. And her arm blade is super cool, so that's a plus. When Silverwolf uses her technique Force Quit program, she fires at an enemy and reduces toughness from all enemies, ignoring their weakness types. If enemies are weakness broken, this will trigger the Quantum Weakness Break effect. This is by far one of the best techniques in the game in my opinion, so utilize it well. For Traces, prioritize her skill first, and then her ultimate, and finally her talent. If you're going for a DPS build, you can equally prioritize her skill and ultimate. Lastly, you can level up her basic attack, but I wouldn't level it too much if you're going for a support build. One of my mistakes for leveling it too much. I mentioned some of her bonus ability traces before, but I'm going to repeat them again here for some extra information. As mentioned before, her Ascension 2 bonus ability extends bug durations by one more turn, and you have a 65% base chance to apply a random bug to an enemy you weakness break by Silverwolf. Her Ascension 4 bonus ability extends the duration of a weakness implanted by one turn. This includes the new weakness type resistance reduction, but not the all type resistance reduction. Her Ascension 6 bonus ability will let Silverwolf decrease an enemy's all type resistance by an additional 3% if an enemy has 3 or more debuffs. It should be no problem getting 3 debuffs on enemies since Silverwolf can easily implant bugs as well. So now, how much effect hit rate does Silverwolf actually need? For any new players who just installed the game for Silverwolf, or for those who don't know, effect hit rate increases your chances of landing a debuff onto enemies. These enemies will also have a certain amount of effect resistance which can help block these debuffs. So even if a skill has a 100% base chance to land a debuff, it's not 100% because you need to factor in enemies' effect resistances. The most important debuff you need to be able to land is weakness implanting because you would feel horrible if that fails to land. In patch 1.1, effect resistances were actually nerfed on enemies, making Silverwolf even better, and you actually don't need as much effect hit rate as before. Now you may have heard a few numbers floating around that Silverwolf needs about 96% or 97% or even 100%. All credits to this chart by Vero and at AEO from the Kaching Mains Discord. Thank you for all your hard work. As you can see on the bottom left, Silverwolf at E0 needs about 97% effect hit rate against a 40% effect resistant enemy in higher levels of content for a Trace level 10 skill. But let's talk about this for a second. Very few enemies are going to have 40% effect resistance, and at the same time, Trace level 10 is a super high investment for a support character. So to answer the question of how much effect hit rate you need will depend. According to the chart, I would say having a minimum of 80% effect hit rate is a great start, and having around 100% would be great, not just for your skill, but for your bugs to land as well. Getting that much effect hit rate shouldn't be too much of a problem. You're most likely going to get 20 to 40% effect hit rate from your light cone, and a 5-star effect hit rate body gives you about 43.2%, which can help you hit the minimum amount of 80% already. And with all minor traces unlocked, you will get an additional 18%. You also have effect hit rate substats and an additional 10% effect hit rate from the 2-piece Pangalactic set. Also, this chart includes how much effect hit rate you need for E2 as well if you need it. Lastly, if you want even more data and charts and even an effect hit rate calculator, I will leave links down below. Now onto her light cones. Her signature light cone Incessant Rain increases effect hit rate by 24%, and when an enemy has 3 or more debuffs, it increases your crit rate by 12%. Whenever you use any of her attacks, she has a 100% base chance to implant Ether Code on a random hit enemy that does not have it yet. Enemies with Ether Code implanted on them will receive 12% increased damage for one turn. Just an incredible all-around light cone for her that increases her damage output and overall support capabilities. Debuffing enemies further to receive 12% increased damage is not just great for Silverwolf, but for her team members as well. For free-to-play players, you absolutely don't need to get this because we are getting this free-to-play event light cone before the tutorial mission starts, and it's super easy to get to super imposition 5. At S5, it gives a massive 40% effect hit rate, and when you attack enemies that have their defense reduced, you gain 8 energy. Definitely an S tier light cone you must get, and it really helps you be flexible with your build. With higher investment on your relics, you can potentially just use a crit body instead of an effect hit rate one, and if you really wanted to, you can use an attack percent rope instead of an energy regeneration rate one. If you miss out on the event light cone, Eyes of the Prey is another great option for a support build with 20% effect hit rate and increases damage over time by 24%, which is great for the quantum entanglement debuff. Good Night and Sleep Well is a good DPS light cone that increases 12% damage per debuff with a max of 3 debuffs. At S5, you can get up to 72% more damage with 3 debuffs. Another solid option if you want to go for damage. Welt's light cone in the Name of the World can be a good option, but the effect hit rate increase only works for her skill, so it becomes just a pretty good DPS light cone, especially at level 80. If you are super early in the game and don't have any other options, you can give her Void, which gives 20% effect hit rate for 3 turns only. For Relics, considering how much damage she does, a 4-piece Quantum Genius set will be your best set for both support and DPS. If you are using Zila or Qingque with Silverwolf, you are most likely farming this set, so I'd say it's a great chance to farm this for Silverwolf as well. If you are going with a lower investment build or you're in the early to mid game, 4-piece Wildweed set works well, especially for the 6% speed increase so you can get more turns in and generate more skill points with slightly stronger basic attacks for your team. For planar ornaments, I recommend the 2-piece Pangalactic set for the 10% effect hit rate, and your attack increases based on 25% of your effect hit rate, and you get up to 25% attack this way. If you are going for a full DPS build, especially if you have E6 and don't care too much about effect hit rate, Sao Sotos may work for you for the extra crit rate and the 15% ultimate damage increase. For main stats, on the body you would want effect hit rate for a support build. If you can get enough effect hit rate from substats, your light cone and traces, consider using a crit body as well. If you're going DPS, a crit body is your best bet. Also, if you have E2, you can go for a crit body as well. For boots, go for speed so that you can debuff enemies first for your team members, but if you want just full damage, go for attack. For the planar sphere, go for quantum damage, and you have a few options for your rope. If you want the absolute best ult uptime, go for an energy regeneration rope unless you have E1. If you have E1 or going for a full DPS build, go for attack percent. Some people recommend not using an energy regeneration rope if you are using the event light cone, but in my opinion, it is the best option because you won't be using your skill all the time to get the most energy, and this lets your basic attacks regenerate a lot of energy and you get your ult back really fast. For substats, focus on effect hit rate, crit, and speed. Attack percent and break effect are helpful as well. Before I talk about teams, I just want to say if your team can clear the main story content and you enjoy using them, use that team. I will be only giving my suggestions and recommendations. There are so many different ways to make teams with Silverwolf because she is very versatile. You can really just have her on any team and she works great as a support Nihility unit. But in my opinion, when it comes to team building with her, there are a few important things to consider. First, you want to consider how many elements you want in a team. As of patch 1.1, we are only able to have 2 to 4 elements since we can't have a true mono quantum team just yet. Second, remember that abundance and preservation units will influence how you build around your Silverwolf team, since in most teams you would want to have at least one, and their element will influence which weaknesses you can implant. Third, you would want at least 2 team members who are good at either dealing damage or weakness breaking enemies, or potentially both. The reason I say this is because when you're trying to plant a weakness on an enemy, and let's say you have a very strong unit such as Zila, you would really like for Silverwolf to implant a quantum weakness. However, if you implant a different weakness, let's say physical, and your only physical unit is Natasha, most likely you wouldn't be too happy with the result because 1. Natasha's skill and ult aren't actual attacks that can reduce enemies' toughness bars, and 2. Her basic attacks aren't that strong, so you don't get much value out of it. But if you had another physical unit like Clara on your team, who can both deal damage and break weaknesses very well, you feel like you get a ton of value out of whatever weakness you implant on your enemy. Let's start with Zila and Qingque teams because they are the biggest winners when synergizing with Silverwolf. Note that I believe they work the best on separate teams because they are both very skill point negative, but if you really want to use them together, it could work if Qingque just waits for 4 of a kinds and her ult and uses a lot of basic attacks. And if you are curious on how to build and play Qingque, feel free to check out my guide with a link in the description below. A dual Quantum Lightning team with Zila, Silverwolf, Jingyuan, and Bailu would be amazing. Whatever weakness Silverwolf implants, both Zila and Jingyuan will absolutely demolish enemies and weakness break efficiently. Jingyuan may have to use his skills less and rely more on Lightning Lord since Zila is pretty skill point negative, and Silverwolf and Bailu would have to do a lot of basic attacks as well. I would also recommend Bailu to have a 4-piece Wandering Cloud set to gain an additional skill point at the start of combat. If you don't have Zila, you can use Qingque, and Serval would be a good sub-in for Jingyuan as well. A dual physical team with Zila, Silverwolf, Clara, and Natasha have a lot of potential. Clara may have to use her skill less, but that's okay since most of her damage comes from her counters. I would also recommend Natasha to have a 4-piece Wandering Cloud set to gain an additional skill point at the start of combat. If you don't have Zila, Qingque works well as well, and if you don't have Clara, E1 Su Shang works decently because she would save both Zila and Qingque skill points. Also, as a future team, I feel like Luka would work really well here as a Nihility character and make this a hyper carry team. One of the best Qingque and Silverwolf teams is hands down with Arlan and Bailu. Qingque is a pretty skill point negative character, but Arlan does not use up any skill points, so it works perfectly for them. But just a heads up, Arlan and Bailu don't have the best synergy because Arlan wants to have his HP reduced to do more damage, and she might heal him randomly or controlled heal from her ult. But she can potentially save Arlan from a killing blow, so that's a plus for them. But overall, this team is great. And now this dual ice hyper carry team is worth mentioning. It would be ideal to have a stronger ice unit, but Pela just works amazing with Silverwolf because Pela can give Silverwolf an additional 10% effect hit rate from her A4 bonus ability. Also, since Pela can reduce enemy defenses, Silverwolf paired with the event light cone before the tutorial mission starts can regenerate even more energy. Ice also can delay enemies and Silverwolf's debuffs can last longer. March 7th is also very good at chipping away at enemy toughness bars. If you need more survivability, feel free to switch to Japard. A potential team in the future I can see is a dual quantum imaginary team with Luocha. I can see him doing some decent weakness breaking with his ultimate. For the 4th slot, I'd say Welt is a good candidate, and if he's more built as a sub DPS with enough effect hit rate, he would provide more utility for this team. Quantum break effects, imprisoning, and slowing down enemies will all extend Silverwolf's debuffs. I can see Yukong working extremely well with Hun characters like Zila with their crit and attack buffs. It also seems like Yukong will be a decent weakness breaker. In the future, a destruction or erudition imaginary character will potentially work better here. Okay, but what if you don't have Zila or you don't really want to use Qingque? Then I would look into some mono type teams. Remember, these teams work best if enemies already have natural quantum weaknesses. A mono ice hyper carry team would work extremely well. With Yang Qing's A2 bonus ability unlocked, he deals additional damage to enemies with an ice weakness. That's some crazy synergy you can only get with a unit like Silverwolf. As mentioned before, Pela synergizes super well with Silverwolf also, and if you have E4 Pela, she can reduce ice resistance by 12%, which is amazing for Yan Qing. If you need more survivability, feel free to switch to Japard. If you want to potentially tackle multiple enemies, a hyper carry mono lightning team with a well invested Jingyuan can be pretty solid. Tingyu may not be able to contribute much with weakness breaking, but her normal attacks with her high attack builds are decent enough. A mono physical team with amazing weakness breakers would work really well too. Su Shang's sword stance will trigger much more and Clara would provide amazing AoE capabilities. And finally, as shown before, you can build your team around your main DPS and build a general team, and this type of format also works really well if you look at Silverwolf as a standalone Nihility unit who can debuff defenses and other stats and quantum break really well, and you look at weakness implanting more of a small bonus. This can help you be more flexible with team building with her. If you want to build a main DPS team with Silverwolf, I would recommend this type of format with some decent AoE damage, buffers, and a healer or shielder. And now finally for Eidolons. She is perfectly fine without them, but if you're aiming to get some, I would recommend getting E1 and up to E2. At E1, when you hit an enemy with your ultimate, you receive 7 energy for every debuff the enemy has with a cap of 5 debuffs, totaling 35 energy. With this, you won't need an energy regeneration rope for your planar set, since you will be getting plenty of energy, especially if you are using the event free-to-play light cone. E2 reduces effect resistance by 20% to all enemies who enter battle. This is actually really good and helps not just Silverwolf but other team members such as Pela and Welt. Everyone can use less effect hit rate relics and focus more on crit stats. Specifically for Silverwolf, I would recommend giving her crit body over an effect hit rate to utilize her damage potential here. E3 increases her skill and talent level by 2. This is very helpful since it increases the base chance of landing weaknesses and debuffs enemies even more, and not to mention the skill damage increases by a lot as well. At E4, it lets her ultimate deal additional quantum damage equal to 20% of Silverwolf's attack for every debuff an enemy has, max 5 debuffs. Puts on a lot of extra damage, but not really necessary to get this Eidolon unless you're going for E6. E5 increases her ultimate by 2 levels and her basic attack by 1. This slightly increases the defense reduction percentage on her ult, but increases her ult damage by a lot. E6 is probably the most broken Eidolon I've seen so far. For every debuff an enemy has, Silverwolf does 20% more damage, up to a limit of a staggering 100% damage. At this stage, she will become a designated DPS unit for your team, and it will be better to use a light cone that focuses on damage at this point. I personally can't wait to see how Silverwolf develops more in the meta, especially more team comps with future characters. What do you all think about Silverwolf so far? Let me know down in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, please make sure to like and subscribe. Also, follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/FrenchTutor_. I'll be streaming live every now and then. Take care now.